I was still holding grocery bags when my son looked me in the eye and said,
I'm tired of seeing you every day, Dad. Ciao.
I keep the lake to my left when I pull into the drive after the morning shift because old habits like a consistent horizon tame the thoughts that try to fly apart. The neighborhood is quiet at this hour, kids still at after-school programs, commuters not yet home, a lone mower 2 houses down pushing a green wave across the lawn. Inside, the house holds its ordinary warmth. I set my keys in the dish near the door, rinse the smell of machine oil from my hands, and let the hum of a half-open radio chassis fill the living room like a low, familiar chord. The armchair by the front window is older than my son, its leather cracked to a map of everywhere I've sat through winters. I face it toward the water the way a pilot parks a nose at the runway, and I sit for 1 minute before anything else. Rosa used to tease me for that ritual. You calibrate before you feel, she'd say. She was right. The minute is quiet inventory. The list of bolts tightened at work, the 2 new filters we're waiting on, the grocery staples I'll pick up later, and which bill auto drafts this evening. Order first, then the rest. The living room is my most honest sentence. A framed photograph of a P-51 Mustang I helped restore at a museum downstate hangs over the mantel, glass cool beneath my fingertips when I dust it. Below, a box holding envelopes is sorted by due date. Electric, water, property tax, internet. On the shelf, a black ledger lies flat, elastic snug around its middle. I log everything in that book, repairs, groceries, Piper's art supplies when I sneak them into the cart, because numbers are the language that remains steady after long days. When Rosa died, the house got quieter but clearer. I found clarity in paper. A will drafted with Calvin Rhodes at the church after service clinic, the deed verified, the title insured, a tuition trust earmarked in Piper's name so that one day, if she wants, Lyft will feel like something more than luck. The American way, they say, is clean lines around money and boundaries. I don't know about slogans, but I know sleep comes easier when your name on a page means what it says. I made sure my name meant what it said. After the funeral, Jason and Tessa came for a little while, the kind of phrase grief lets through without inspection. They brought Piper and her soft pink blanket with planets on it, and I carried their boxes in the rain and told them to take the big bedroom facing the trees. Temporary arrived like a house guest and kept removing its coat without ever leaving it by the door. Weeks turned to months. The routine made room for more routine. My early shift, the lawn watered in long, slow arcs, the radios on the dining table notched into orderly guts, and the soft press of a child's weight on my knee when I read. Sometimes Piper leans on the window with me. Her breath fogs the glass and she draws albino wings into the mist. "Look, Grandpa," she'll say, and I'll answer, "Easy there, Ace." Those moments are the bright stitches of the day. They don't need any other name. When Jason's schedule at the electronics store shifts, he leaves a note on the counter. When Tessa edits video late, a thin strand of light slips under their door. We pass like boats that know their channels. It isn't tense, it's simply layered, the way wallpaper hides older paper and no one talks about the seams. There are small erosions you don't notice if you don't go looking. One picture frame nudged to make room for a ring light. A pair of shoes parked where I used to set down my toolbox. The armchair drifting a foot from the window because a playmat works better there. None of it hostile, all of it cumulative. I keep my ledger on the shelf and the utilities current. I wipe handprints from the hallway and replace the air filter a week early when the pollen count climbs. I'm not strict, but I keep 3 rules and say them to myself when the house is loud: respect, fair share, truth. I was raised to carry my weight and to thank the hands that lift what I can't. It sits wrong on me when gratitude thins into assumption. The groceries don't argue, the internet doesn't announce itself, and the furnace only speaks when neglected. Because I prefer quiet, I take care before quiet breaks. If you're not careful, the kindness you mean as an open door becomes the hallway everyone uses without thinking where it leads. I know this, and still I make dinner on Sundays and leave the light on over the sink when I go to bed. Heading out, Jason will call from the hall sometimes, keys already in hand. Thanks, Tessa might add when I pass them a package the courier left by the steps. We exchange small notes about trash day, about Piper's preschool craft that needs glue, about a squeaky hinge on the back gate. Short sentences are enough to keep a house in motion. The longer ones, the ones that add up to how we're doing, wait for a weekend that hasn't arrived yet. I don't press. Pressure makes people say things to escape the room, not to meet you in it. In the garage, the Ford sits beneath the dusting of pollen, and I wipe the windshield with the side of my hand. I keep a small bin of parts for the truck, belts, bulbs, a spare relay, because self-reliance is half planning, half permission not to panic. I carry that habit inside. When a neighbor's mower fades, the lake answers with a soft slap against stone, and the house, even with more bodies in it, becomes a device that holds time in place. If I feel anything sharp, I walk it off and put it somewhere useful. A list, a drawer, a checked box on a yellow pad. Sometimes at night, I sit in the armchair with the lights off and let my eyes adjust until the silhouettes of the mantel and the doorway soften into friendly shapes. The water throws a broken ribbon of street lamp light into the room, and for a minute I remember Rose's laugh when I burned the first pancakes I ever tried to make. Memory doesn't ache if you let it have its edges. I don't build altars to the past, I build shelves that can hold what's here. The house on Lake Erie was supposed to be a promise with a roof over it. I worked 30 years for that kind of sentence. Paid in full, warm in winter, no drama except the weather. A man can forgive a lot if the bones are good. What I haven't figured out yet as I close the ledger and set it square on the shelf is how a promise stays two-sided when the door is always open. The horizon steadies me. The rules are the same as yesterday. And still, as the day turns, I feel something tilting in the quiet, like a picture not quite level that I cannot leave unstraightened much longer. The grocery bags cut into my fingers as I shouldered the door with my elbow and stepped into the familiar hush of the house. Late sun slanted across the hallway, turning floating dust into a field of gold flecks. The lake's light ran its thin ribbon along the floorboards toward the kitchen. Somewhere inside one of the bags an onion shifted and knocked against a can, a small clatter that should have meant nothing and somehow meant a great deal. Jason was standing at the threshold between the hall and living room, posture squared the way people stand when they've practiced a speech in front of a mirror. I felt the chill off the paper towels in one bag, the smoked salmon sweating cold through thin plastic in another. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I needed a hand. He simply looked at me as if I was late to something I hadn't been invited to. "I'm tired of seeing you every day," he said. The words were plain and polished, and they slid off his tongue like a key cut to fit one lock only. Tessa feels the same. "You should find somewhere else so we can live our life." The handles dug deeper. I set the bags down one by one, lining them against the baseboard so nothing would bruise, as if careful placement might make the moment less abrupt. I heard the fridge motor cycle on, distant traffic slip by, the small winter of silence that follows a clean strike. "Say that again?" I asked, not because I hadn't heard, but because a repetition sometimes reveals doubt. His eyes didn't move. "We have a right of residency," he added. "We've contributed." Tessa hovered at the edge of the room, her expression neutral in a way that is itself a decision. "It's better for everyone," she said, barely above a whisper, as though volume could soften direction. The husk of a smile flickered and disappeared. "The deed is a solid, rectangular fact in a drawer I can pull open in the dark." I reminded myself of that as I answered, keeping my voice even. "The deed is in my name." It was not a threat or a dare. It was the plainest sentence I know how to make. My chest felt tight, not the kind that warns of danger, the kind that warns of saying something you will have to apologize for later. I lifted the bags and slid them onto the kitchen counter, one at a time, rearranging their weight into order. There was no echo. I lifted the ledger from the shelf on my way down the short hallway and stepped into the small office that had once been a nursery. I closed the door with the gentleness you use on a sleeping child and stood with my back against it until the shaking left my hands. The lamplight made a yellow pond on the desk. The pages of the ledger gave off the dry smell that paper keeps when it has been opened and closed by the same set of fingers week after week through seasons that have nothing to do with weather. Rosa used to say when a problem startled me that I would rearrange the kitchen drawers in my head before I said a word. She understood the way I move through a crisis. First locate the tools, then pick them up in order. I placed my phone flat on the blotter, laid a note card beside it, and wrote 3 names. 1. Dylan Brooks. 2. Dr. Priya Nandakumar. 3. Calvin Rhodes. There is comfort in a list that can be completed. I called Dylan first. I described the house, the deed, and the requirement that any sale be quiet, clean, and fast, off-market if possible, with strict confidentiality. I did not use the word revenge. I used the words timeline and documentation. He listened the way a competent mechanic listens to a rattle, already visualizing the bolts he will check. He said he understood. He would come by tomorrow mid-afternoon when the light would show the lake to best advantage. We agreed on the kind of discretion that keeps noise out of the gears. I left a message for Dr. Priya asking for a comprehensive physical and cognitive check. I want every gauge reading logged, every number current, not because I doubt myself, but because facts remove speculation from rooms where it likes to breed. I have learned that nothing quiets a claim like a piece of paper signed by someone who measures for a living. Then I phoned Calvin. I asked him to pull my file. Deed, title insurance, will, the tuition trust for Piper. I told him I needed boundaries reviewed and reinforced. He didn't ask why. He told me to bring my papers and the questions I haven't thought of yet. People who have drafted many wills understand that love and math often sit across from each other and argue in low voices. In the next room, a refrigerator door opened and closed. A cupboard clicked. Footsteps moved down the hall and back again. I let the sounds pass through the walls the way wind passes through pine, noticed but not binding. I wrote the date on the ledger line and what had been said in the hallway, not for posterity so much as for the accuracy of the record that is my own life. I do not intend to punish anyone. Noise is cheap. I prefer documents, timelines, signatures, the cold justice of a process that does not need to raise its voice. If I am to disappear from the daily sight line of my son, I will do it correctly and not empty-handed. It isn't about taking. It is about restoring symmetry that has come to lean too hard in one direction. The lamplight thinned as the sun lowered. Through the blinds, the lake gave off its last strip of nickel brightness. Machine oil lingered at the cuticles of my hands. I rubbed them clean with a towel and felt steadier after the small work. I closed the ledger and squared it with the desk edge. I set the phone face down on top of the note card. Tomorrow, from the street, the house will look as it always does. Brick catching morning light, lawn trimmed, the armchair by the window. Inside, though, the math will be different. I have changed the units by which the day will be measured. Dylan arrived just after noon, the sun laying a bright stripe across the entryway and the lake pushing a pale breeze through the screen. He wiped his shoes without being told and lifted his phone, the camera's faint clicks mapping the angles I had long since memorized. The window that framed the elm's crown, the brick that took light better after rain, the roofline I'd paid to straighten last spring. We moved in a slow circuit that felt like pre-flight. No flourish, no chatter, just checklists. From the corner vent, I could hear the furnace fan idle, a low, reliable hum. Order soothes a house the way a steady hand calms a skittish dog. Quiet, I said, clean and fast. He lowered the phone. Pocket listing, 1 week, discretion. I understand. We sat at the dining table where I had already laid out the paper proof of what I owned and what I meant. The deed with my name alone, title insurance with its ancient armored language, the paid-in-full record and last year's roofing invoice with date, contractor, and check number. Paper has its own smell when it's been kept dry and honest. The pages held the faint starch of envelopes and the cardboard whisper of file boxes that open only for reasons. He ran a finger down the deed, nodded at the chain of title, and asked 2 crisp questions about easements and assessments that I answered with numbers and dates. It is a comfort to speak a language that has answers. I pointed to a line I'd written on an index card. No occupancy rights conveyed, I said. Explicit. He made the notation, "I'll assemble a discreet packet." "You keep the house camera ready." His tone was even, the way professionals sound when every step is routine and therefore safe. We did not shake hands because neither of us needed ceremony. He left the way he had come, quiet as a tool, back into its drawer. I walked the circuit again, seeing through someone else's eyes for the first time in a long time. The floorboards I refinished one winter week plank by plank. The small crack in the baseboard under the bookcase, the way the mantel's paint broke its gloss where heat collects. The armchair by the window kept its station. I lifted it an inch and set it down again to feel a control register in the quiet. I sent Jason a text. "A tech is coming this afternoon to look at the furnace. Best not to be back early." He answered with a single line, "Got it." The neutrality of 3 syllables can be a gift. I used it. I moved through the rooms with a rag and a bucket, coiling cords, tucking frames, wiping chrome so it gave back small, true circles of light. I carried the kitchen trash to the bin and heard the lid seal with a soft, efficient thump. These are the motions I choose when the heart begs for noise. They have the dignity of work. At 2, Maggie knocked with a loaf of banana bread wrapped in wax paper still warm at the seam. She saw the aligned stacks of paper on the table, the way a house holds its breath when it's being considered. "Healthy boundaries are a form of love," she said, and pressed the loaf into my hands. I told her thank you. We didn't make a visit of it. The warmth in the bread moved into my palms, and something in my chest answered it. When the house emptied of footsteps and errands, I opened the hallway closet and pulled down the shoeboxes I'd labeled by habit more than foresight. Receipts lay in clean ribbons of ink, stapled to warranty cards, paper clips unbent for just this purpose. I photographed each with my phone and wrote the serial numbers into a notebook. Tools, console radio, the good drill, the mixer, the heirloom clock I had appraised when Rosa thought it might be worth something, and it turned out sentiment earns its own kind of value. The ballpoint clicked open and shut as I moved from room to room, the rhythm a little metronome to keep me from rushing. Ownership, like love, benefits from being documented before anyone argues about it. Boxes waited in the spare room. I numbered them in pencil on masking tape. 1. Shop tools. 2. Office and radios. 3. Kitchen smalls. 4. Linens. 5. Mantle items. On a notepad, I made an index and slipped it into a plastic sleeve because paper deserves armor when it is asked to carry a life. I felt the old contentment of systems settling into place. The house did not change. My place in it did. I called a storage facility in the next town, one without a billboard on the interstate. The clerk spoke like someone used to renters who show up in weather, and I liked her for it. I booked a unit, prepaid 6 months with the newly opened account, and asked for the contract by email. The PDF arrived before we hung up. I dropped it into a folder structure with names that will make sense in a year. I saved it to a USB drive I keep in the toolbox between the 13th and 15th, because 15 years in a hangar taught me people look for secrets in safes, not in sockets. When the administrative heat cooled, I stood in the office doorway and read the house like a line of text. Nothing shouted. The air was clean and moving. I opened the ledger and on a page otherwise white, wrote a single line in block letters big enough to be seen without my glasses. Plan A. Sell clean. Leave quiet. The permanent marker bled slightly at the corners of each word. The imperfection was human and therefore welcome. I closed the book and stretched the elastic around its middle, feeling the snap register in my fingers. Dusk began to thread through the blinds. The lake darkened 2 shades and then again wavelets tapping stone as if counting down. I squared the ledger with the desk edge, aligned the stack of labeled boxes so their seams matched the baseboard, and set my phone on the sill where the signal is best. Dylan's text confirmed 3:30 tomorrow, just enough time for light to travel across the living room and rest on the mantel the way it always has on good days. From the street, nothing would look different. Inside, a mechanism had been wound and set, its teeth meshing so quietly that only the person holding the key could hear it move. The day began like a checklist. I cracked the blinds to let the lake lay its silver across the floor and felt the house wake under it. Dylan's text arrived at 7:42 a.m., a small buzz on the sill where the signal is best. confirming the 3:30 showing, reconfirming discretion, promising to arrive 5 minutes early to pace the light. I walked the rooms once, twice, the way I used to walk a wing before a test run, fingertip on trim, eye on fasteners, listening for the tone a settled space makes when it's ready. On the kitchen counter, a note waited in Jason's handwriting, a slanted strip of certainty. Dad, watch Piper Friday night. No question mark. No, please. I took a pen and wrote a single word on a clean, sticky no, and left it beneath his. I didn't underline it. I didn't add reasons or apologies. Boundaries are most useful when they are quiet and legible. The kettle clicked off, the furnace fan thumped once and settled into an even breath, and I let the house register that something inside it had changed by a degree. By mid-morning, Tessa's version of our home began populating in places my name doesn't live. A thumbnail showed the front walk at a flattering angle, her title card blooming with italics and regret. The hashtag sat there like a tidy verdict, hashtag free our home. I didn't press play. I captured the frame, the caption, the timestamp, the location tag that nudged our neighborhood's feed. Screenshots stacked into a folder, and I titled it the way mechanics title problems they already know how to fix. Public claims, raw. The phone kept breathing against my palm with new notifications I did not open. I muted them, printed a single test page to check margins, and fed the printer a dozen more as if I were spitting out rivets to lay into a seam later. I prepped the house for a stranger's eyes without lying about what it was. Cords coiled into soft rings, throws folded to right angles, faucet chrome wiped to a round, honest mirror, pantry shelves squared so labels faced forward but not like soldiers, more like neighbors who know each other's names. I aired out the living room, then latched the windows with the small click I've loved since the day I installed them. On the dining table, I placed a shallow bowl of citrus and a legal pad with 2 bullet points I would use if asked. Deed, maintenance history. Facts travel better when they are written down first. Near noon, my phone buzzed with a short acknowledgement from Jason in response to my earlier boundary. Noted. The neutrality drew a calm line under the morning. I reinforced it the only way I know how, by tending small things. I swapped a furnace filter a week early and wrote the date in fine tip marker. I ran the coffee maker through a cycle with vinegar and water and watched the brown rise and clear. I took a broom to the front stoop and knocked grit from the mat. There is a dignity to preparing a place as if it were a person you respect. The doorbell rang at 3:25. Dylan stepped in with the couple, their shoes wiped without being asked. He kept introductions brisk, his voice in that elegant register where competence speaks for itself. We moved in a quiet circuit, lake light, roof line, furnace closet where the new filter sat white as a blank page, the orderly pantry, the living room that could be anyone's and for the moment was absolutely mine. The couple asked one practical question about the age of the windows. I answered with the month and year and the warranty language. We sat at the dining table. Dylan placed a single folder between us and the husband nodded once, the way a person nods when they've already made the decision and now honor it with paperwork. Earnest money would be wired by end of day, pending final signatures. We were set. I didn't feel triumph. I felt alignment, the sensation of threads pulling true after they've been crossed too long. As they left, Dylan's glance said what didn't need saying, and mine returned the same. I watched their taillights blink at the stop sign and then go. I called Calvin from the desk where the lamplight makes a reliable circle. We spoke in nouns. I asked for sale precedence language up front and center, for no tenancy or occupancy rights conveyed in unambiguous type, for a liquidated damages clause should anyone attempt to obstruct with claims untethered to fact. He agreed, already drafting while we spoke, the clack of his keyboard like rain on a tin roof. I told him I would send a brief summary of the screenshots, not the noise, just the bones, and he said to archive them, nothing more. Later, on his way to the door with his messenger bag, Jason tried a conversational angle about rates, a drift-around question that pretends to be weather. "You been watching refinancing lately?" he asked, eyes on the bag's strap. "Market's weird." I rinsed a coffee mug and set it on the rack. "The house is paid off," I said. I keep it that way. I wasn't harsh. I was finished. Before the light fell completely, I completed my own hygiene, placed a fraud alert with the bureaus, pulled credit reports, locked old pathways I should have closed. The day gratitude made me too generous. Confirmation numbers went onto a page that will be there when memory decides to take a day off. Emails slid into a folder whose name would make sense to me in 6 months. Through the mail slot came a slim packet from Maggie. Homeowner writes in Ohio, quick reference. Paper-clipped and highlighted in 2 colors. I texted, "Thank you." Community is not the comments. It is a neighbor who brings you facts and then goes back across the lawn without asking for a performance. I opened the ledger and wrote 4 lines. Boundary set, deposit received, evidence archived, counsel refining terms. Then I closed it and squared it with the desk edge, a simple geometry my hands have known since long before I could explain why it calms me. Calvin's draft pinged my inbox. The printer warmed. Outside, the lake darkened from tin to slate, and the house held its frame the way a good airframe does when the air pressure drops and the wind arrives to test what you've built. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now hold tight. Leaving first isn't escape, it's the cut that decides everything. The call from Calvin broke the even hum of the morning like a rivet gun starting up on a quiet line. I had just finished wiping the kitchen counter when his name lit the screen. His voice was all nouns and dates. "A bank flagged a power of attorney with your signature," he said. "It isn't yours." "We've stopped it and notified compliance." I wrote the time in the margin of my ledger, underlined it, and asked for written confirmation. "On its way," he said. "Breathe and gather paper." I set the phone down and felt for a second the old surge that accompanies a stall warning, pure adrenaline trying to convince you to move the stick instead of the mind. I chose the mind. Dr. Priya's office fit me in before lunch. The clinic smelled of disinfectant and printer heat. A wall clock counted in clean, democratic seconds. Vitals first, then a memory screen that swung through months and sequences and short subtraction, the calibrated run-up I expected. Dr. Priya worked without fuss, eyebrows quiet, pen exact. When we finished, she printed a letter on embossed letterhead, signed twice, pressed the seal until the paper dimpled. I asked for 2 originals and a scan to my secure email. "Take care of yourself," she said. I folded the letters flat, the cardstock cool against my palm, and walked out into a daylight that felt newly exact. Back home, the house listened. You can tell when a place has readied itself for pressure. Boards find their grain, glass settles a breath deeper in the sash. The knock at the door arrived just after 2. 2 officers stood on the porch, posture professional, shoes placed square on the mat. We received a complaint alleging concealment of shared assets, the taller one said. The phrase sat there like an uninvited guest who brought its own chair. I opened the door and stepped aside. "Dining table," I said. "Paper likes a flat surface and light." I laid out the deed first because ownership should lead, then the pocket sale contract with earnest money receipt, then my itemized inventory with serials and receipts, a chain of small anchors leading back to purchase dates that could be checked without argument. Dr. Priya's letter stayed beneath my hand until it was asked for. It wasn't, so I left it there, a silent witness if needed. They read, they nodded, they asked 2 questions that could be answered with numbers and a yes. Voices stayed level. No one postured. The taller officer said civil matter, which is the closest a uniform gets to a blessing of order. He left a card. I logged the time, the badge numbers, and the phrase in my ledger because memory is a sturdy tool until the day it isn't. Behind them, near the archway to the hall, I caught the angle of Tessa's phone lifting, its lens a bright bead. I turned, so I filled the frame with my shoulder and raised a hand. "No filming inside my house," I said. Not barked. Just a closed door. You don't try twice. The officers left without comment on it. After the knob clicked, I emailed myself a summary with timestamps and attachments, CC'd Calvin, and placed the officer's card in a clear sleeve. Maggie texted an hour later she had removed a clip from the neighborhood group for violating rules and kept the admin log. A better record than outrage every time. Paperwork doesn't fix people, but it fixes claims. I printed a single page and wrote a header in block letters. Timeline. The notice beneath was plain. Keys to be surrendered at closing. 5 days after that, the premises to be vacated. I sealed it in an envelope and set it square at the center of the kitchen table, the way you place a level and watch the bubble find middle. It wasn't threat, only schedule. The difference between weather and climate. Piper drifted in after her nap, hair a small storm, paper airplane gripped by the middle. "Fly, Grandpa," she said, and pushed it. The plane nosedived, then shuddered into a glide that surprised us both. I knelt and put a new crease along the leading edge. "You know how real airplanes roll across the ground on wheels?" I asked. She nodded with her whole head. "Houses have wheels too. Not rubber ones, paper ones. Deeds, contracts, keys. When the wheels are true, the house goes where it's supposed to, easy and safe. Grown-ups have to keep the wheels round." She pressed her hand on mine the way kids confirm gravity. "Round," she said. We tried the plane again. It cleared the chair back and landed clean on the rug, like it had meant to all along. When the house was quiet, I moved as I always do after weather passes. I scanned Dr. Priya's letter and dropped the PDF into 2 clouds I trust and onto the USB in the toolbox. Slotted between the 13 and the 15, I photographed the envelope on the table and the officer's card for redundancy, saved the images with names a future me won't curse. I added a ledger line, POA attempt blocked. Capacity certified, complaint closed. I stretched the elastic around the book, listened for the soft snap that says enough for now. Outside, Lake Erie tapped stone with the lazy persistence of someone drumming their fingers until a room decides what it wants to be. I set my phone face down and squared the stack of documents with the desk edge. It is an old superstition of mine that paper aligned makes thinking align. A gray band of cloud moved in from the west and the light inside shifted to the color of nickel. You cannot make people decent with paperwork, but you can keep indecency from moving furniture and calling it rearrangement. Heat meets pressure, storms develop, frames hold if they're true. I intended to hold. Calvin's email arrived before the kettle sang, a small ping in the gray hour when the lake is neither metal nor glass. Subject line, emergency motion denied. The PDF opened to a single page that felt heavier than paper. Timestamp docket. The judge's brief conclusion that nothing pled justified stopping a sale. I saved it 3 times. Legal. Sale. Orders. A mirrored copy on the USB tucked between the 13 and 15 millimeter wrenches. One more in a cloud folder whose name only I would recognize later. I wrote the docket number in the ledger and drew a thin box around it. The whistle finally rose, long and even. I turned off the flame. By late morning, the door opened on motion I hadn't invited. Tessa came up the walk with 2 movers, the kind of men whose strength makes them believe in momentum. They had box 2, office and radios, half lifted before I stepped between them and the threshold of the porch. "Items with receipts and serials in my name do not leave," I said. It was not a performance. It was a reading of instruments. One of the movers looked to Tessa. She kept her gaze on her phone as if the screen might absolve her of gravity. At the sidewalk's edge, Maggie raised her own phone, but not for a crowd. She photographed license plates, faces in 3/4, the lifted box with its taped numeral. Documentation does not shout. It accumulates. I dialed the non-emergency line and gave the address. When the cruiser rolled to a stop, I had a 1-page index in hand and a sample of receipts clipped in a sleeve. The officer looked, asked 2 questions, and said the line that returns rooms to themselves. Civil property with proof. The box came down. The movers carried their momentum back to their truck and drove away without ceremony. I wrote the incident number in the ledger, the ink still wet as the quiet returned. Standing in the doorway, I felt the fork I'd been walking toward. Argue the rest of the day. Shout, defend, lose edges, or leave first and make my case the way I always do, with schedules and signatures. Leaving first multiplies order. I chose order. I measured the path from living room to driveway, noted the angles that would nick a wall if you turned too wide. I checked the storage code, elevator hours, gate timer. I packed tape and a paint-safe marker into my back pocket as if I were dressing for a shift. I booked a Penske 16-foot over the phone, pickup at 1:45, return flexible within 24 hours. The agent's confirmation number went onto a sticky note and then into the ledger. I texted Dylan, "Can buyer accommodate closing 24 hours earlier?" The three dots pulsed a moment and steadied into yes, time set, addendum forthcoming. I forwarded the update to Calvin and moved the calendar event. The light in the room changed by a degree as if someone had turned a dimmer from doubt to decision. I printed the inventory clean, page numbers bottom right, and in each footer a tiny QR code that linked to a read-only folder of photos. Serial plates, receipts, date-stamped angles of every item from two perspectives. I slid one set into sheet protectors and laid it on the console. Another went into the glove box. Transparency is armor when people prefer story to proof. In the hallway, Jason waited with a posture that wanted to be relaxed. His voice came out of the middle distance. "Don't humiliate me." The words hovered between plea and threat, unsure which would buy more time. "I'm not," I said, tightening tape on box 3. "This is consequence." The tape snapped flush against cardboard, a sound I have always liked for its finality. A door shut softly down the hall, a small closing that felt honest. I lifted the leather armchair the way you carry a sleeping child, one arm under, one hand to the back for balance. It is an object that remembers who sat in it. I eased it down the steps and onto the bed of the Ford F-150. The old truck coughing once and settling into the familiar idle that has never lied to me. I crossed the straps in an X, tightened the ratchets until the chair bowed slightly into compliance, checked brake lights, mirrors, tie-downs, as if this departure were a runway. You cannot rush the part that keeps you safe. The phone rang with Calvin's name while I cinched the last strap. He didn't waste syllables. He filed for temporary guardianship through a senior services outfit. Claims you lack capacity. I kept my breath steady. We submitted Dr. Priya's letter. Also, the company runs paid placements on Tessa's channel. We flagged the conflict. Petition withdrawn. Effectively denied. I looked at the X of straps and felt the line in my shoulders relax by one click. "Thank you," I said. "Log the filings and final." He was already doing it. By evening, the apartment I had rented for a month looked like an honest beginning. One lamp, a stack of boxes that smelled like warm cardboard, a window giving onto a quieter street than mine. I heated canned soup, ate with my back against the wall, and let the radio stay by my foot in a taped square that would be a table later. The spoon clicked against the enamel bowl in a rhythm that could have been a clock. A neighbor dragged a bin across cement outside, and then the corridor went back to its comfortable half-silence. The phone lay face down. I opened the ledger. Day -1. No looking back, I wrote, and the letters felt different than the others, as if they had mass. I stretched the elastic around the covers and felt the soft snap that tells you a thing has been put to bed for the night. I shut off the lamp and sat in the dark until my eyes found the room's new edges. When you stop arguing with a house, you can hear its bones answer you. The lake was farther now, but the air still held water in it, and I let that small continuity be my steadier. I don't feel victorious. I feel aligned. There are trains you cannot stop by standing on the tracks and raising your voice. There is paperwork, timing, a truck booked on a weekday, a chair strapped in an X, a calendar that has moved itself one square forward because you moved your hand. Tomorrow we'll test the frame. Tonight the mechanism is wound, the door is locked, and the tools are where they belong. Morning steadied itself like a level bubble. I laid the packet on the desk, contract copies, earnest money receipt, receipts of paid utilities through month's end, my ID, a notepad for timestamps. The keyring sat beside it with a clean, familiar weight. I tested the voice recorder app, set the phone to airplane mode to keep it from chirping at the wrong moment, and squared the stack to the desk edge. The rooms carried a brighter echo now that the armchair was gone. A house empties into its own outline and for a few minutes breathes easier. Outside, the lake flashed nickel under a thin sun. I walked the perimeter one last time. Basement lights off, pilot flames steady, breaker labels legible, the new furnace filter still crisp white in its frame. I left a single bulb on above the sink for the first look the buyers would take from the door. Dignity is in the small arrangements. Trash bin rinsed, floors swept, blinds set to the angle that gives the most honest light. When I locked the back door, the key turned like a sentence that had found its period. They arrived in a midnight blue Chevrolet Suburban that nosed too fast at the curb. 2 aides in suits and a woman with a wheeled case that whispered over the walk. She drew a paper from a folder and announced a temporary restraining order, citing a sale below market that concealed shared assets and prejudiced inheritance. I tapped my recorder and held it up between us. "Please read the grounds aloud," I said. She complied, voice precise. I spelled her name and firm, spoke the time and date, watched the breeze lift the corner of the order like it wanted to leave before we did. Dylan pulled in with the exact punctuality I hired. He had already filed our morning packet with the court. His briefcase looked lighter than theirs because it carried only what mattered. He stepped aside, called Chambers, and forwarded the PDFs from his phone. We waited in the shade under the eave, the smell of hot breaks from the Suburban fading, the lake tapping stone with patient fingers. My keys cooled against my palm. When his phone lit again, he turned it so I could see a single line. "Orders vacated," he said. "Proceed." I saved the audio file, backed it up to the local folder, and watched the opposing attorney gather her papers with the tight movements of someone packing a story that failed to clear customs. The buyers arrived in a sedan that took the turn generously. They walked the front steps with the tentative excitement of people who have learned to be gentle with good luck. We kept pleasantries brief. I handed over the key ring and the garage opener, took a signed receipt, and walked them to the door. The living room's negative space looked honest, like a pause in a song that still belongs there. Dylan gave me a small nod. I returned it. There is no ceremony for leaving correctly. Gravel shifted under my boot. Something inside me unhooked without tearing. By mid-afternoon, my phone rang with Detective Nolan Price's number. His tone was professional, the way a straight edge feels. I agreed to come by the station. The interview room carried the haunt of many stories stripped to ficht. Metal chair, neutral walls, a window that was and wasn't a mirror. He read from a list: sofa, paintings, coffee maker, portable safe, and I answered with documents. Photos, serials, invoices slid across the table in an order that made its own argument. He compared dates, vendors, and signatures. The room relaxed by degrees. "This complaint is baseless," he said. I nodded. Understood. He mentioned my right to counterfile for false report. I told him I'd confer with counsel. There was nothing to dramatize. We shook hands like people who prefer established procedures to opinions. When I stepped back into daylight, an email from Tessa waited in my inbox with the brittle tone people use when sponsors have called. The subject offered a reputation fix. I forwarded it to Calvin with a single line: "Please handle, defamation archive updated." Then I put the phone away. Reputation is a current. If you try to dam it with speeches, it finds a culvert and floods somewhere else. Paperwork narrows it into a channel where it can be measured. The remainder of the afternoon belonged to rebuilding the frame. Calvin and I finalized an irrevocable trust for Piper, separate trustee, distributions keyed to educational milestones instead of need narratives. Love can be generous without being porous. While we were on the call, I closed the last legacy account and shifted the final automatic payments to the new bank. Confirmations printed with their quiet assurance. I slid them into a folder labeled in the plain language that keeps a future self from cursing a past one. When I hung up, the apartment felt more like a room and less like a box. I cracked a root beer and let Sinatra pour a low, civilized line across the table from a cheap radio that made him sound closer to human. There is a sweetness to carbonation when your mouth has been full of paper all day. It reminds you of rooms where nothing needs to be signed. The lake was a rumor at this distance, but the air still carried a little of its bite. I thought of Piper, of the trust she would never see as a cage, and of the narrowness that sometimes masquerades as love when love is tired. She will have lift built into her days, even if she never knows which rib the wing hides it under. At last I opened the ledger. The page took ink without feathering, a small mercy. I wrote, TRO vacated, keys transferred, theft complaint closed, trust established, account sealed, and sat back. The words looked like parts fitted properly. Torque marked, safe under vibration. I squared the notebook and laid the pen parallel to its spine. The phone went face down, the way I set tools' teeth in so they do no harm. Night pressed a cool palm to the window. I listened to the apartment settle. The good creaks that mean wood is remembering how to be itself again. Reputation might ripple for a while, but law draws the straight lines a life can build against. Tomorrow, I will begin the quieter work. Walls, routines, the grammar of a day that doesn't apologize for holding. For now, the frame is true, the rest will hang where it should. Morning opened without committees or crises, just the lake's pale light slipping over the desk and the steady breath of a room that remembered how to be simple. Calvin's email arrived at 8 on the dot, a cease and desist with takedown and apology language, fee shift clause if ignored, a clean 48-hour clock stamped in the first paragraph. The letter's bones were good, specific URLs, screenshots referenced by exhibit, signatures pre-blocked for e-sign. I read it twice, checked the attachments, and replied with one word, approved, send. Then I slid the PDF into the defamation folder, named the file so future me would find it in one try, and wrote a ledger line, demand sent 0804. With the legal current aimed where it should go, I turned to money that lets a person sleep. Over a short call, the advisor and I arranged the proceeds into a ladder of CDs maturing every 3 months for 2 years, AA and AAA municipal bonds that don't run hot, and 12 months of expenses in cash so a blown water heater or a new set of tires is an annoyance and not a story. Yield modest, risk boring, exactly right. Confirmations hit the inbox in a tidy stack. I downloaded them, standardized file names, date, institution, last 4 digits, and printed one set for the binder. Paper is a backup for the part of the brain that decides it's earned a day off. On my way back from the printer, I found a small kit bag on the mat. Balsa, glue, fine sandpaper, a short note in Maggie's slanted hand. Hands learn before hearts do. I held the bag by the string and felt something like homework from a kinder school. Her text followed. Club meets at 7. I thumbed back a yes and set the bag on the table where the light would make a small ceremony of it all afternoon. At the desk, I drafted a letter to Jason that had more white space than adjectives. Dates first, then the simple reality of a deed, the legality of the sale, the timeline that finished what it started. I set expectations in bullet-clean paragraphs, meetings through Calvin's office, no unannounced visits, respect for Piper's schedule, no use of my image or accounts. I kept the nouns heavy and the verbs plain. Nobody was being tried. The point was to remove opportunities for confusion. I printed, signed, scanned, and sent it via counsel, then walked the envelope to the mailbox and bought the quiet authority of certified mail. Ledger line, boundary letter sent. Before lunch, I ran a full pass on the archive. Cloud sync. OK, USB duplicate updated, external drive mirror complete. I opened the QR-linked inventory and spot-fixed 2 file names that would have annoyed me in 6 months. IMG_2037-final2.jpg became Mantle Clock Serial A41_2023-06-11.jpg. I slipped a printed index map into the front of the binder, a little cartography for paper seas. The binder closed with a friendly papery sigh. Dr. Priya's prescription for ordinary days was short enough to live, walk, breathe, Log it. I took the path along the Cuyahoga, watched a gull angle itself into a headwind, and then ride it as if it had been invited. On the way back, I counted a measured lap on a cheap wristwatch, the kind that still honors minutes. The pantry reset itself to adult basics: coffee, fruit, whole grains, soup. I set 2 recurring reminders on the calendar: blood pressure, walk, and let the phone own the memory of them so I didn't have to. Just after 1, an email from a major brand slid into the inbox with corporate geometry. Termination of Tessa's partnership for cause, citing community complaints about elder defamation and reputation risk. It was precise without cruelty. I forwarded it to Calvin with no commentary. Later, he replied, leveraged into a signed commitment from Jason and Tessa, no future exploitation of my image, no access to my accounts or data, takedown of prior posts. I logged the commitments and saved the countersigned PDFs. Not vindication, just cause and effect written in a font that doesn't blink. Dylan sent a courtesy note in the afternoon calling it the cleanest closing he'd had this quarter. He offered a small batch bourbon as a housewarming gesture. I thanked him and wrote, I stick to root beer. We were done. Respect doesn't need epilogues. Piper's face filled my phone late in the day, blue marker smudged on her fingers, a paper plane colored brighter than the sky behind her. Make a won't fall one with me, she asked. We will, I said. Rules help wings. She nodded like we had invented gravity together and raced away to show someone else. At 7, I carried the kit bag to the community room where a handful of people bent over balsa in a hush that sounded like concentration and kindness. Maggie lifted a hand from across the table. No conversation required. I sanded a spar until the edges forgot they had ever been square, brushed away the pale dust, and felt the way a straight piece of wood agrees to be a wing only after you've listened to it. Glue set along a seam with the strange conviction of small commitments. The room hummed. The clock on the wall had no second hand, just a face content to be round while we worked. Back home, I washed the coffee mug, wiped the sink, aligned the shoes by the mat. The legal binder sat on the desk beside the plain wing, drying on wax paper, 2 kinds of structure made by the same pair of hands. Calvin's demand had gone out. Money had folded into instruments meant to hold. The boundary letter was on its way, files were squared, the walk was logged, the kit was underway. None of it heroic, all of it weight-bearing. Before bed, I set tomorrow's reminders to fire at times. I actually keep and open the ledger to the page that had been waiting. I wrote, demand sent, allocations placed, boundary letter sent, archive mirrored, health routine set, sponsor letter leveraged, commitment signed, club attended. Then I closed the book and set the pen parallel to its spine. The room settled. The apartment's new walls felt less like cardboard and more like a frame. I looked at the wing and the binder and thought, the walls that carry weight are standing again. A week after the handover, the apartment stopped sounding like a box and started sounding like a room. Morning came in clean through the east window, angling across a small table where a cactus Maggie brought had found its permanent corner beside the radio. I poured coffee black and opened a fresh page in the ledger, not the legal one, the living one, and wrote with a steadier hand than I've had in months. Day 1 of a new beginning. The pencil rasped just enough to confirm paper was doing what paper does. Hold a claim that doesn't need a witness. I clicked the window latch a finger's width and let the air settle. It smelled of rain promised, not rain threatened. Calvin's update arrived between sips. Investigations opened, he said, meaning the forged POA and the fake medical document had moved from our files to the court's calendar. His line stayed professional, the way a straight edge keeps its geometry no matter whose hand holds it. Understood, I said. I saved the PDFs he forwarded into a folder with names that will make sense to me in a year, logged the docket numbers in the margin, and closed the laptop like a book I would return to when returning mattered. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt relieved by the notion that process could walk itself without my breath on its neck. On the counter, I laid out a blue sheet of paper and folded a plane for Piper the way Rosa taught me to crease. Firm along the spine, never crush the nose. I wrote on one wing, respect is like lift, unseen but it keeps you flying. On the other, I drew a tiny star because 4-year-olds recognize stars more easily than metaphors. I slipped in 2 stickers and a simple folding diagram, then walked the envelope to the mailbox. The tracking receipt went into my wallet because small promises deserve the same paperwork as big ones. When Jason reached out asking to talk, I didn't let the conversation happen where history likes to ambush you. Doorsteps, driveways, text threads that stretch thin and then snap. Through Calvin's office, I sent one sentence: meeting can be scheduled in council's conference room. It wasn't a wall, it was a frame. The calendar invite arrived an hour later. I accepted, wrote the date in the ledger, and recognized a new muscle, the one that lifts only what belongs to it. At noon, Maggie texted a reminder about her students' exhibit at the Arts Center. I went for 20 minutes, not to be seen, just to stand in front of color. A girl's painting of the lake in October had maple reds like cut garnet and a band of nickel light under a sky pulsing toward weather. Good work, I said to the group, and meant it. No one needed my story, they had paint for their own. Outside, I breathed the faint chemical sweet of tempera drying and decided to keep a little of that permission in my pocket. Back at the apartment, I took a practical step that had no poetry in it and needed none. I listed the leather armchair. When the buyer messaged and asked why I was selling, I wrote, "I'm strong enough to sit in a new chair." He replied with a thumbs up I did not have to decode. We met in the parking lot. He tested the frame. I counted the bills and scanned the handwritten receipt. The space it left behind was not a hole. It was a shape the room had been waiting to take. In the afternoon, Dr. Priya pinged the patient portal. Blood pressure stable, keep the walks. I set the next check-in on the calendar and bought groceries that matched the plan. Fruit, whole grains, a can of soup for nights when effort needs company. I don't romanticize discipline. I put it on shelves and in reminders so it will be there when the day tries to bargain. I cracked a root beer near dusk and tuned the radio to a standard station just fuzzy enough to sound like memory. Sinatra slid under the noise floor and didn't ask for attention. I shaped a larger paper airplane from cardstock, wrote "Won't Fall on Its Wing" and set it on the bookcase beside the cactus. The window stayed open a hand's width. The city hummed at a distance that felt like a choice instead of a sentence. When the inbox chimed, it wasn't trouble. Calvin's assistant sent the calendar hold for Jason's meeting. Maggie forwarded a photo from the exhibit. The shipping update for Piper's envelope marched a dot from here to the next town. I updated the ledger like I would a maintenance log. Investigations opened, Piper's package mailed, conference room meeting set, chair sold, BP stable, exhibit attended. There was no drama in the ink. That felt like the right kind of success. I thought about the old house the way you think about a machine after its last run, with respect for what it carried and without a wish to go back inside. Some victories announced themselves with symbols. Mine arrived like a quiet torque mark, a line of paint across a nut and the metal beside it so you can tell if anything has slipped. I looked around the apartment and saw the marks. The labeled folders, the cleared corners, the rooted plant, the wing drying on wax paper after a careful bead of glue. Nothing begged for interpretation. Everything asked only to be used and put away. Before bed, I read the first page again, day one of a new beginning, and close the ledger with a soft thud. I set the pen parallel to its spine because alignment matters in small, unphotographable ways. The apartment made the good sounds. A neighbor's step, a pipe's satisfied tick, the whisper of air crossing a small distance to get where it's going. I stood at the window and let the city be itself, lights pricking on without arguing about who deserves night. The plane on the shelf held its angle. The cactus stood indifferent and faithful. I didn't ask for promises from either. I promised to keep the rules that let wings work and to let the day hold without apology. Evening arrived with the soft grammar of a held day, a clean sink, folders squared to the desk's edge, the cactus drunk on slant light, the blue paper plane resting on the bookcase like a promise that learned to sit. I set a cold root beer on the table and tuned the radio low until a tenor line threaded the room without asking for applause. The cap's hiss broke and was gone. I opened the living ledger to a fresh page and wrote a header that refused spectacle. Lessons, not grievances. The felt tip stuttered once, then moved the way a mind does after deciding not to keep score, only to keep faith. Two small messages arrived, neither requiring me to hold them up with my hands. Maggie sent a photo of her students in the gym, balsa gliders arcing under fluorescent dusk. Beneath it, 3 words, "Lift found." I replied, "Thanks." Calvin's voicemail was the right size for the truth. Investigations on the forged POA and fake medical document were proceeding on the court's clock. No theater. I logged the note and put the phone face down, the tool where it belonged. I opened the browser and filled out a volunteer interest form for the Arts Center's shop. Tuesdays or Thursdays, late afternoon, background in aircraft mechanics, comfortable with hand tools, safety first with kids, references upon request. There was no space for autobiography, which felt like a mercy. Hands first, hearts follow. I clicked submit and let the confirmation screen be enough. Back at the page, I wrote the lines I meant to keep not because they sounded wise, but because they tested out under load. Respect is the first rent that gets paid. Memory. The morning I circled no under Jason's note, and the house shifted by a degree but didn't tip. If it needs shouting, it likely needs paper. Memory. The dining table laid with deed, contract, receipts, a room returning to itself as a uniform said civil. Kindness without boundaries invites extraction. Memory. The ring light replacing a picture frame, the way my chair drifted from the window by inches before it was suddenly somewhere else. Community is who brings facts, not views. Memory. Maggie's quiet photos at the curb, her packet through the mail slot. Money that lets you sleep is money well placed. Memory. The laddered CDs and boring bonds, the root beer that tastes better when bills are already paid. Teach lift by example, not lecture. Memory. Piper's paper plane clearing a chair back because we creased it right. Keep receipts, of payments and of yourself. Memory. Serial numbers inked, and the steadier voice I found when I wrote things down. Leave correctly. It closes doors without slamming. Memory. Keys on a ring, a signature, gravel underfoot, no speeches. I folded 3 one-sentence letters on a narrow seam and tucked them into the ledger like shims beneath a wobble. To Jason, consequences are the tuition for adulthood. I've paid mine, you will pay yours. To Tessa, attention is not reputation, the latter has invoices. To Rosa, the house kept its promise long enough for me to learn mine. I did not mail them. Closure without contact is still closure. Some doors keep their dignity by staying shut. I lifted the Blue Plains twin from the shelf and smoothed one wing with the back of a fingernail, the way you correct a small warp before it becomes a stall. The window was open a hand's width. The city's hum made a horizontal line across the room. I said the only sentence that deserved the air: kindness isn't surrender, rules keep wings. The plane went back to its place and for a second caught a draft and shifted half an inch, movement enough to prove the rule, not tempt the wind. I wrote a tomorrow list that looked like peace instead of penance. Walk at 7, call Dr. Priya's office to log BP, email Dylan a final thank you, sand balsa spar, pick up stamps, bring a bag to the lobby's food pantry bin. None of it would trend. All of it would hold. Before I closed the laptop, I sent one last email through Calvin's office. Courteous, not cold, reaffirming that any future contact from Jason will go through counsel, no unannounced visits, respect for schedules. Boundary stated, channel provided. The sent copy slid into its folder with the quiet authority of a drawer that closes true. The room dimmed to a color I trust. I summarized the arc without retelling it. I built a day that holds. I capped the pen and laid it parallel to the ledger's spine. The radio clicked off, leaving the apartment to its good noises, a pipe's settling tick, someone's shoe across the hall, the window's small dialogue with air. In that ordinary hush, I heard the difference between surrender and stewardship. Surrender asks nothing and gets less. Stewardship asks for rules and gets flight. I stood at the bookcase and looked at what remained. A cactus content to keep water, a plain content to keep its angle, a binder of papers that didn't need defending, only storing. The old house was elsewhere now, and I wished it no harm. It had carried us long enough. The new place was not waiting to become a story, it was waiting to be used. I turned the lock, not like a barricade, but like punctuation, one mark among many that makes a paragraph read clean. At the window, I let the city be itself, strangers stacking their evenings into lives they will keep or leave. Somewhere a siren drew a line through distance and was gone. I could have said that I felt strong, but that was only part of it. What I felt was structurally sound. The frame was square. The loads were where they belonged. And when I reached for the light, I left the lamp on low for the comfort it gives a room, then checked the deadbolt for the comfort it gives a person. A light left on is kindness. A lock turned is respect. Together they make a home. In the calm after the storm, there is a moment when a person looks around and realizes the room is finally holding. Not because the world fell silent, but because the frame was rebuilt, straight, squared, and honest. That is the quiet triumph at the end of this journey. Not fireworks, not vengeance, but a day that stands on its own legs. Paperwork replaced shouting. Boundaries replaced bargaining. Dignity returned the very minute accountability shook hands with truth. What kept the roof from sagging wasn't a grand gesture, it was the humility of systems. A ledger line, a scanned receipt, a date written where it can be found later, these are the small hinges that swing big doors. And when the doors swing cleanly, the noise outside stops being a threat and becomes simple weather. You cannot stop the wind. You can choose a well-built frame. Kindness, for a long time, gets mistaken for surrender. But kindness with a lock turned and a light left on is stewardship. It cares for the house and for the people in it without letting anyone pawn the keys. Love, when it is truly love, pays the rent of respect first, then decorates. And respect is not a feeling, it's a habit. It's the boundary that says, talk to me through the front door at a decent hour with your papers in order. It's the calendar appointment instead of the midnight demand. It's the habit of honoring the door even when anger tempts the window. Order is not cold. Order is a form of tenderness you can count. It lets bruised hours breathe again. It makes room for small human rituals. A walk at 7, a root beer at dusk, a radio turned low because the story of the day doesn't need a spotlight to be real. Order teaches patience. Patience teaches proportion. And proportion, knowing what deserves a response and what deserves a folder, teaches peace. There's also a lesson about lift. Airplanes fly not because they fight the air, but because they cooperate with it according to rules that never apologize for existing. Lives work the same way. When promises lean on structure, they carry more than their own weight. When they drift into entitlement, they fall from a height they never earned. The fix is not anger, it's alignment. Crease the paper right, and even a simple plane clears the back of a chair. In the end, security is less about walls than about channels. Where will conversations happen? Where will money rest? Who keeps the ledger and who keeps the keys? Answer those quietly, early, and in writing, and many storms arrive smaller than their reports. The crowd will always have an opinion. Community, on the other hand, brings facts to your porch, then goes home. Hold close to community. Wave kindly to the crowd as it passes by. And if you need to begin again, begin small. Sell the furniture that no longer fits the person you're becoming. Keep the receipts that keep your story straight. Choose rooms that breathe, work with your hands until your heart remembers, and set tomorrow's appointments at hours you can keep. You don't need a new past. You need a present that can carry weight. Thank you for spending your time here, for letting this story find you where you are. If something in it steadied you or challenged you, share the moment in the comments and tell us why. Your reflections help other people name what they're feeling and find their next right step. We read every note, and this community grows stronger because of what you add. If you'd like more stories about resilience, boundaries, and the quiet power of doing things the right way, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. It's the easiest way to stay connected when the next story drops. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that kindness isn't weakness and that order can be a balm, send this along. May your locks click, your lights glow warm, and your days hold steady. We're grateful you're here. We're building this space with you, one true line at a time.